Have you ever felt drawn to a legendary name like it's a lighthouse in a storm all at once? The Hemingways are that kind of name, adored by some, feared by others, and forever wrapped in a shadowy mystique. Think of Ernest Hemingway with his stoic gaze, penning literary classics that would ignite imaginations for generations. Then imagine the weight of carrying that surname, the pressure, the allure, the whispers of genius, and the terrifying rumors of a so-called family curse. This is the story of Margaux Hemingway, granddaughter of Ernest. Many know her face from glossy magazine covers or a memorable film, but not everyone knows the silent battles she fought behind the scenes, nor the complexity of a life spent trying to outrun shadows cast by family tragedy. If you're ready for an emotional deep dive, a fresh look at a story so often summarized only by heartbreak, settle in. We're about to explore Margaux's remarkable journey, her lofty highs, her personal struggles, and the echoes of a legacy that refused to let her go. By the time Margaux was born on February 16, 1954, the Hemingway family was already overshadowed by rumor and tragedy. Ernest had been in multiple plane crashes. He was known for bouts of deep depression and health struggles. In 1961, 5-year-old Margaux would witness her grandfather's departure from the world, though she was too young to grasp the magnitude of it. The patriarch who loomed so large in everyone's mind was gone, dying by a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Some families bury their traumas quietly. For the Hemingways, secrecy was nearly impossible. The moment newspapers printed that word, suicide, speculations began swirling. Was there a genetic component? A curse? Something unstoppable lurking in their bloodline? The talk continued as other members of the family also wrestled with addiction, mental illness, and in several tragic instances took their own lives. Amid this swirl of speculation, Margaux grew up under the bright skies of Idaho and Montana. She was raised near pristine lakes and forest paths, occasionally fishing just like her grandfather wrote about, or hearing stories whispered among relatives. She was tall, radiant, and undeniably athletic. Locals described her as that effervescent teenager who seemed always in motion, someone who might outrun any gloom. If a sadness or tension pulled at her, she hid it behind a charismatic grin and a tendency to laugh easily. By the time she reached adolescence, she carried more than just the Hemingway name. She also had luminous cheekbones, shimmering hair, and a presence that made people do double takes. It wasn't long before the modeling world came knocking. These were the swinging 1970s, an era when supermodels began skyrocketing to global fame. Margaux possessed a near-instant magnetism. She signed with high-profile agencies in New York. Designers loved her. Photographers found her face mesmerizing. She was on her way to catwalks, couture magazines, and studio sets decorated with the flamboyant style of the era. But behind the scenes, there was the push and pull of something else. While she soared professionally, old ghosts hovered. Her father, Jack, wrestled with his own complexities. As the son of Ernest, extended family members had already succumbed to the same crippling darkness that took her grandfather. Margaux might have tried to ignore it, but that was like refusing to see a gathering storm. For now, in her late teens and early 20s, she pushed forward, unstoppable in her quest for personal stardom. In 1975, Margaux achieved a remarkable feat. She landed what was reported to be $1 million contract with Fabergé. That sum was staggering for any model at the time. Magazine covers, brand endorsements, and her face plastered on billboards. The public took notice. She was more than just that Hemingway girl. She was Margaux, the new fashion sensation. Many who encountered her in these early years recall her as an affectionate presence, open-hearted, ready to befriend makeup artists, stylists, doormen, whoever was around. It was a bright period, and it seemed like the curse talk might just be a silly superstition. How could gloom stand a chance against that unstoppable upward flight? But life has a way of revealing tensions once the bright lights fade. After spectacular success in high fashion, Margaux tried to expand into acting, hoping to follow in the creative footsteps of her family. In 1976, she starred in a film called Lipstick, playing a model who endures horrifying violence. It was a controversial movie made even more sensational because Margaux's younger sister, Marielle, played a supporting role. Critics had a field day. While some praised the film for highlighting the trauma of sexual violence, others dismissed it as exploitative. Margaux's acting received a mix of reviews. Some said she lacked range, others claimed she had a raw, untamed presence that could blossom with the right director. Still, the movie's edgy subject matter garnered plenty of press coverage. Suddenly, Margaux wasn't just a face on a magazine. She was a new type of star, one braving the precarious leap from runway to screen. She found the film world far more treacherous than the catwalk. Modeling, she said, was straightforward. You wore the clothes, you posed, you delivered an image. Acting required exposing emotional vulnerability. For someone carrying a boatload of family baggage, that was a double-edged sword. Over time, she began feeling the weight of expectation. Would she become a strong actor like her sister Marielle was shaping up to be? Would she prove that her fame was more than just her last name or her looks? Those doubts started to gnaw at her. Yet the public wanted more. They wanted Margaux's face on the next runway, on the next talk show, in the next magazine spread. Her schedule was punishing, her emotions raw. Privately, she began to buckle. She battled bulimia, a destructive coping mechanism that countless models have fought in an industry obsessed with thinness. She also started struggling with alcohol dependency, nights in Manhattan clubs, champagne at every party. These weren't out of place in the 1970s. But for Margaux, who had a predisposition to addiction, each glass carried deeper dangers than she first realized. She tried to manage it. She tried to keep up appearances, but the swirl of glamorous parties often veered into chaos. Sometimes she recounted late nights stumbling through her apartment or failing to show up for important calls. Magazine editors might have assumed she was just another wild star, but for Margaux, each slip felt like a step toward a jagged precipice. During this time, she also grappled with a sense of dislocation. She was a Hemingway, but she was overshadowed by her grandfather's colossal fame and haunted by his tragic end. She had parents who did their best, but the family had never fully confronted the aftershocks of Ernest's suicide and the subsequent losses. Margaux yearned for normalcy, an impossible goal when paparazzi followed her, or when her very name carried hints of both glamour and doom. Over the next years, she traveled widely, searching for something intangible. She visited places rumored for spiritual retreats, tried New Age therapies, and occasionally separated herself from the fashion scene to find a simpler reality. But that gravitational pull, both of her fame and her troubles, always yanked her back. One seldom discussed phase of her life was her quiet years spent on a ranch in the American West, a period in which she tried to reconnect with nature the way her grandfather once did. Locals recall seeing her ride horses at sunrise or picking up a fishing rod at a nearby creek. For a while, the peace of that environment brought her relief. She'd wake up early, help with chores, do some yoga, and watch the sun come up over the plains. She found solace in the wide open landscapes and felt more in harmony with her body than she had in the high-pressure modeling world. A friend from that time later said that Margaux would get emotional speaking about her childhood memories of fishing with her dad. She felt as though she was reclaiming a piece of her younger self. Yet even then, the curse rumor lingered, occasionally revived by tabloids that loved to mention Ernest's demise or the suicides of other Hemingway relatives. People whispered that Margaux too was doomed, that the entire lineage was overshadowed by mental illness. Some even said it was the price they paid for Ernest's genius, a vile speculation, but one that thrived in sensational media. Margaux pushed back on it, insisting that she was an individual, not an omen. But when you grow up in a family defined by both brilliance and tragedy, it's tricky to separate your own identity from the swirling myth around you. Seeking another career revival, Margaux returned to the public eye in the 1980s, landing commercial gigs like famously promoting free Dent gum and attempting cameo roles in film and television. You'd see her in a few interviews with that same bright smile and willowy figure, talking about healthy living or the joys of being outdoors. By outward appearances, she seemed to have stabilized, but in quiet moments she wrestled with depression, an issue that had afflicted multiple members of the Hemingway family tree. She would swing between bursts of optimism, exercising, meditating, reading widely about self-improvement, and episodes where she found it hard to leave bed, her mind swirling with demons she couldn't articulate. As the late 1980s and early 1990s arrived, the modeling industry was changing. New faces were on the rise, styles were shifting, and the bright spotlight that once fell upon Margaux had dimmed. Work grew scarce. The million-dollar contracts were a memory. It didn't help that she'd developed a reputation for being unreliable, missing shoots, showing up late or hungover. She tried to pivot again, perhaps to philanthropic causes or wellness projects, but her personal struggles proved relentless. The tabloids at this point were brutally unkind, painting her as a washed-up model turned cautionary tale. It was the kind of coverage that fueled her anxiety and chipped away at her self-esteem. Nevertheless, she kept trying to break the cycle. At one juncture, she moved temporarily to Europe, hoping that new scenery and a slower pace might heal her. She delved deeper into spiritual disciplines, sometimes visiting ashrams or yoga retreats. In interviews from that period, she spoke about how critical it was for her to find balance and cure the restless mind. Some suspect these remarks were her subtle allusions to staving off the depression that haunted her. A friend once recalled Margaux's fascination with journaling. She'd scribble personal reflections each morning, trying to dissect her feelings. She believed if she could only be honest with herself on the page, maybe she could avoid her grandfather's fate. What many fans never realized was that Margaux also battled epilepsy, and she was reportedly on medication for it. The condition, though seldom publicly discussed, might have contributed to her emotional turmoil. Living with epilepsy can bring on heightened anxiety, concerns about social stigma, and fear of seizures. In combination with depression and addiction, this was a grueling trifecta. By the mid-1990s, Margaux's finances were in tatters. She was rumored to have lost her home at one point, couch-surfed with friends, and even struggled to maintain stable housing. It was a harsh downfall for someone who'd once been a million-dollar model. More heartbreak arrived when she realized many of her old acquaintances from the fashion and film worlds had drifted away. "That's show business," they said, or "that's New York." The ephemeral nature of fame meant that once she was no longer the it girl, she was easily replaced. She felt abandoned. Her relationships with family were also strained. Though she loved her sisters, each of them was fighting their own battles. Margaux Hemingway was emerging as an advocate for mental health, later writing openly about the family's struggles. But the sisters' bond was complicated by the media's constant comparisons and the difficulties they each faced. Despite those bleak circumstances, Margaux maintained a flicker of hope. People who spoke with her in 1995 claimed she was working on a plan to launch a wellness brand or produce a documentary about her search for balance. She wanted to reclaim her narrative, to stand up and say, "I'm not a victim of any curse." She was known to have begun practicing more advanced forms of meditation, exploring different modes of therapy, and confiding in close friends. One acquaintance said, when Margaux was hopeful, she'd light up the entire room. She had this magical ability to convince you that everything was going to be all right. But beneath the optimism lurked the old fear that she was living on borrowed time, that no matter how many detoxes or spiritual retreats she tried, something bigger than her might eventually claim her. Friends described a push and pull that was exhausting to watch. She'd be cheerful and forward-looking one week, then suddenly vanish into a depressive fog the next. She'd reemerge apologetic, sometimes physically weakened by nights of heavy drinking or the side effects of prescription drugs. It was a cycle that repeated again and again. A lesser-known anecdote from her final years involves a short visit to Cuba. Although the exact details are murky, it's said that Margaux felt drawn to the island because of the Hemingway legacy there. Ernest Hemingway had famously spent extensive time in Cuba, where he penned some of his masterpieces. Margaux was reportedly curious to see the places her grandfather loved, the whitewashed walls of his old home, the waters off Havana where he fished. She hoped that by stepping on the same soil, she might discover some lost puzzle piece about him, and by extension, about herself. While we don't have a thorough account of that trip, a friend claimed Margaux returned with mixed emotions: wonder at the culture, sadness at seeing the constant references to her grandfather's memory, and confusion about how to move forward with her own identity. At times, Margaux openly questioned whether the entire concept of a family curse might actually be the collective weight of unresolved trauma, magnified by intense public scrutiny. Perhaps it was a cycle, yes, but a breakable one. She knew that her loved ones had faced mental health struggles that were never adequately addressed. Therapy was often stigmatized in earlier decades. Medications were misused or misunderstood. The so-called curse could instead be the result of an unending chain of depression, addiction, and tragedy. During the final chapter of her life in the summer of 1996, Margaux was back in California, living in a small apartment in Santa Monica. She was supposedly telling close contacts that she had big plans. Some rumored she was hoping for a cameo in a new film, or that she might attempt a book about her experiences. She needed money, but she was also seeking a creative outlet, a way to shape her story on her own terms. She was 42 years old, still luminous in many ways, but clearly worn down by decades of emotional strain. On July 1st, 1996, Margaux was found dead in her apartment. The authorities would later list her passing as a death by overdose. Debate sprang up immediately. Was it accidental? Was it suicide? The news media descended like hawks, stoking the Hemingway curse narrative once again. The coroner's reports indicated that her death was indeed from an overdose of phenobarbital, a barbiturate often prescribed for seizures. Many speculated that the stress combined with her penchant for substance abuse had proven fatal. Others insisted it was a deliberate act, pointing to the eerie fact that she died the day before the 35th anniversary of her grandfather's suicide. Her family, including Sister Marielle, suggested that Margaux might have accidentally overdosed while trying to control her epilepsy. In later interviews, Marielle would emphasize that Margaux had shown optimism not long before her death, that she was talking about upcoming projects. She wasn't giving up. Mariel once said. She was fighting. To this day, the circumstances remain murky, with no definitive conclusion about her intent, but the outcome was devastating. Another Hemingway life cut short, fueling the tabloids' obsession with that dark legacy. The controversies surrounding Margaux's death continue to this day. Some believe the media exploited her family's tragic history. Others feel Margaux was neglected by an industry that used her beauty and the star power of her name, but ignored her cry for help. The resulting narrative, The Cursed Beauty, hardly does justice to a woman who battled real mental illness and addiction in an era where effective treatment was still not widely or compassionately addressed. Moreover, there's ongoing debate about how the rest of the Hemingway family responded. Some critics argue that the Hemingways as a whole failed to unify in a moment of crisis. Others claim they did the best they could, given how complicated mental illness can be. The truth lies somewhere in the middle, and it might vary from one person's memory to the next. What emerges, however, from Margaux's story is an important lesson about how fame and family reputation can obscure the urgent need for mental health support. If she had not been a Hemingway, or if she had been living in a time where mental health resources were more robust and stigma was less severe, her story might have taken a different turn. But she was a product of her era, an era that glamorized partying, lacked nuanced conversations about mental health, and often turned the suffering of public figures into fodder for sensational coverage. The significance of Margaux's journey resonates today. Think of how many celebrities and everyday individuals navigate depression, anxiety, or addiction beneath a glittering surface that seems to promise they have it all. Margaux's life is a cautionary tale against assuming anyone is too beautiful, too wealthy, or too famous to be harmed by mental illness. It also calls into question the concept of a curse. Was it genetic predisposition? Was it a repeating cycle of untreated trauma? Possibly both. The lessons for us decades later are about compassion, the need to break stigmas, and the importance of seeing beyond the glamorous veneer. In her final interviews, Margaux once emphasized how she believed in self-healing through nature, spirituality, and healthy living. She clung to that conviction. That quote, less well known, rarely reprinted, went something like, "I try to imagine I'm a little girl again, breathing in fresh air, listening to the sound of water, and remembering that life has so many simple beauties if we only pause." Those words, if accurate, reveal a soul who yearned to recapture innocence, who recognized the healing power of small joys. They are heartbreaking because she never fully found that peace, at least not in a lasting way. But they're also hopeful because they show her intense desire for better days. For those who question whether Margaux overcame the Hemingway family curse, the answer is both tragic and nuanced. She may not have lived to old age free from her demons, but she spent much of her adult life boldly challenging the notion that her path was preordained. She sought therapy, she embraced new spiritual disciplines, she told people openly that she refused to accept doom as her destiny. She could not entirely outrun her own vulnerabilities, nor the harsh reality that mental illness doesn't vanish easily. But in acknowledging the fight, in persistently trying to find her own version of salvation, Margaux demonstrated a resilience that deserves its own spotlight. Her story's broader meaning is that we have to examine the complexities of our inherited legacies, be they family history, genetic predispositions, or cultural myths. Margaux attempted to forge a distinct identity within a famously haunted line. Her example urges us to empathize with those caught in a tug-of-war between personal desire and family burdens. It also reminds us that no matter how cursed a lineage might seem, there's always hope for interventions, for fresh starts, and for rewriting the script. If that hope isn't realized, it's not because the curse was real. More often, it's because mental illness is a formidable opponent requiring sustained support and understanding that Margaux, unfortunately, did not always receive. Today, if you search Margaux Hemingway's name, you'll see references to supermodel, actress, tragedy, and that infamous family curse. But you may not see as many stories about the sweet, compassionate woman who sometimes helped her neighbors carry groceries, or who once spent hours comforting a friend in crisis. You might not hear about her trying to learn new languages, her heartfelt attempts at journaling, or her delight in things as simple as a gorgeous sunset. You probably won't see headlines about her year of quiet ranch life or her fleeting but treasured trip to Cuba. Yet these glimpses of Margaux's humanity matter. They offer a fuller, richer portrait, one of a woman who was more than just the sum of her heartbreaks. May her story encourage us to show kindness, advocate for mental health awareness, and listen more closely to those gentle hints of distress that can hide behind the brightest smiles. Because if there's one thing Margaux Hemingway's life reveals, it's that we can hold both brilliance and darkness within us, and that what we truly need, more than anything, is a compassionate space to keep forging forward together. And that's all for today's video. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up. Let us know your thoughts in the comments section and subscribe so you won't miss out on future uploads. See you next time.